We're going to be covering the extrusion modifier for this video tutorial. Now, I don't want you to confuse extruding polygons for the actual modifier itself. So when I do type in 3ds Max Extrude Modifier objects, you can see that you can start off with a shape like is in this case, and then apply the modifier and then actually get a form in that case. So we definitely will be working with two-dimensional splines or shapes. So popping into 3ds Max, I unhit all my objects, and I'm starting to create now my scene, which has more and more 3D modeling objects, and it's coming together quite nicely. So let's actually explore the Extrude Modifier. So from the plus tab here, I'm going to go back into my Shapes tab, and what I'm going to do is look for a star. I'm going to actually model a footstool using a star, and so in doing so, that's a little large, so let's just dial this back a bit. And I'm actually going to do this in the Modify tab because once you create an object and you leave it, these options are gone from the plus tab. So let's just go to the Modify tab right from the get-go here. Okay, so let's go ahead then, and I'm going to just round this a little bit. And you can see that all the form is nicely rounded there. Let's add a couple points too. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now from here, what I plan to do is add my Extrude modifier. So from the drop-down list, I'm just going to type in EX, and there it is, Extrude. So from there, you can see I have a 0 amount of extrusion added, and obviously I want this to be kind of a cool looking footstool. So let's go ahead and just do that and bring that upwards. I can add additional segments, but I don't think it's going to really make much of a difference. Okay, now let me go back into the star. And the cool thing about working with the Extrude modifier is if I go into the parameters and I dial this back, you can see that the extrusion basically follows it as well too. So that's the nice part about working in the modifier list between the actual shape and the actual extrude modifier. I can modify them simultaneously. And I can maybe just put this over here. So supposedly you want something a little bit more fancier, such as maybe a baseboard. You can easily do that with an extrude modifier. So what you'd have to do is actually create the profile using the line tool, and then once you create that profile, then you can actually extrude it outwards. So going back into my plus sign, I'm going to actually grab my line tool, and I'm going to change it from perspective to instead front. Great. Okay, so I'm going to really super zoom in here, and what I plan to do is with my object snaps off, I'm going to go ahead and draw the profile of a baseboard. So I'm just going to hold the shift key to constrain, so everything's going to snap at increments of 90 degrees, and I'm just going to click and drag, click, and then I'm going to come back over here, really zoom in, and then click. Now I know it's not perfect, but we can change it afterwards. It does give us the option of closing a spline, so I will say yes, that's a very important step. Okay, so here's my side profile for my casing or my baseboard. What I need to now do is break this down into like like in Illustrator where you have your paths and points that you can edit. So while the object is selected, I'm going to right click, convert to, and I want to go convert to editable spline. Great, so now you can see I can actually control the vertexes or the line segments. I do want to definitely control the vertexes, and I'm going to click on this, make sure I can move this into place, like that, maybe a little bit more. Not quite perfect, but it's going to be good enough for now. And just like in Illustrator, I can actually control the Bezier handles too. Let me just move this in here and really sort of make it all fancy. That's looking a lot better. Just this one little part's not quite straight. So let me just see if I can, still a little bit off, but you know what, you're not going to notice in a 3D world. Okay, let's hit the home button, and then there's our profile for our baseboard. Now, if you make your profile too large, you can always scale it down and make it a lot smaller. All right, so let's go ahead to our modifier list. Go extrude again by typing in EX and click on that. So you can see the amount I have extruded is the same amount as last time. And I can just really stretch this out. And of course I can add more segments as well too if I want to break this down and convert this to an editable poly and maybe put some dings and dents into it. Okay, so there's my baseboard. And the nice thing is I can copy this or make instances of this to put this all around the perimeter of your scene. So I'm just going to put this on ground level by changing the Z height. And I'm going to definitely use the gizmo to really control this and kind of put this where I'd imagine a wall. Now I'm going to also use the Extrude Modifier too to create a cool object. So suppose you have like a toy dagger or a toy axe. We can definitely do an extrusion to an outline. So let's go ahead and try that object next. So going back into my plus tab, I'm going to go ahead and take my line tool. And this time, instead of doing it from a front view, I'm going to change it from perspective or front instead to a top view. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw the outline of, say, like an axe. So let me start here, hold down Shift to really constrain that, and hold Shift to constrain that. And now I'm going to click and drag, just like I'm using Illustrator and the pen tool. And click and drag. And of course, if I'm not happy with any of these, I can definitely convert this to an editable spline. And then I can move my points. And let's go ahead and close the loop. Okay, great. So the head's a little bit large on it. Definitely have to work on it. So let's go ahead and move those paths and points. So right click, convert to, again, to a convertible editable spline. Select vertexes because it's the easiest to work with. And let's go ahead and start moving these things. Make sure your lines don't crumple over like this, because if they do and you try extruding it, you will get some problems with extrusion in terms of the geometry crumpling on top of each other. And I'm just going to move this in a little bit too here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, great. So there's my object. Again, we want to do an extrusion. Hit enter, and that amount is obviously way too much, so we're going to really dial that back. And I definitely want to put my line segments down to 1 here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's make this still a little bit thinner. Actually, you know what? I'm going to dial this up to 1 point, actually 2 centimeters should do. Great. Now, the next thing I plan to do with this axe is I want to sharpen the front edge here, the leading edge. Now, in order for me to do that, I actually have to break this whole entire object. So it is a line that's closed. And then, of course, we have the extrusion modifier, which we played with. Now, what we're going to do is take both of these and break these down by right-clicking, and we want to now convert this into an editable poly. The reason why we want to make this into an editable poly is because I can actually then start working with the polygons and I can scale and pinch things down. So, but just be warned, as soon as you take something that has a modifier and you convert it to an editable poly, it means that you have no more access to basically this particular modifier parameters, and as well I can't actually go ahead and edit the line itself, because then that's going to be pretty much done at that point. Okay, so right click, convert to editable poly. And now instead of working with vertexes as well as line segments, I'm now working with the usual, the polygons, the edges, and the vertexes here. Okay, so I want to actually go ahead and select all of these points on the leading edge of my axe. There we go. Now I'm going to right click, and we're going to go ahead and do a scale. And we just want to pinch this on the Z axis, because if I pinch it from the middle, it's going to look really weird. We don't want that. So I'm just going to grab the Z axis here, and we're going to pinch that together so we have a nice sharp outline to it. And you can really see that there too. Now what I can also do too, if I want to, is I can go ahead with my cut tool. And with that cut tool, by selecting it, I can actually go ahead and actually add a handle. And I'm just going to right click to finish that off. Okay, so you can definitely add geometry with the cut tool or the swift loop tool, which is covered in the previous video. And then in doing that, by adding additional geometry, then you can actually do an extrusion with polygon faces. So remember, this is not the same as using the modifier here. So let's go ahead and use extrude from here. And clicking on the face, you can see I can bring this up or down. I'm just going to bring this up ever so slightly just to give the appearance of a bit of a handle. And take your time with your objects. You can definitely create a lot of different things with the extrusion modifier, and then breaking down to an editable poly, and then just kind of messing around with the different faces and adding geometry and doing all those kinds of things. So that is your video on adding extrusions, and you can see that we created 3 objects super fast by using some basic shapes, breaking them down, and just adding some modifiers.